So those were some good examples. Now for the bad examples, you can find plenty of bad examples online, but I'm not going to do that. I kind of don't believe in calling other designers out on their work. So instead, I'm going to jump into Illustrator, where I've kind of deliberately created, or in some cases pulled out bits of my exploratory work where it hasn't come together nicely, where it's not a good fit. So often before I come to the versions that work, I'll explore lots of different pairings, and in some cases, it just wouldn't work. It clashes. So I think these are some good examples of clashes in exploring this brand. So for Lover's London, if you look at just the kind of style of the serif font we've got, and then the script style font, but I'm kind of exploring options to pair with it. Something like this for me just wouldn't work. This has got a very relaxed, almost hand-drawn feel to it, and it clashes completely with the style of this kind of classic, luxurious typeface we have for the rest of the logo. And if we look here, the same is the case if we were looking for ways of kind of working that into the beginning and the end. Something like this doesn't work, and I don't think you can necessarily swap a whole character, a whole script L or script S, and just pop that alongside the serif characters. I think what you'll learn in this course is that you need to kind of take parts of each and work them together really carefully when the styles match. Again here, maybe a nice idea, could we have something that runs through the center of the O, but just in terms of a style, there's a real disjoint here. So again, I think this is a good, bad example. Same with the S on the end. I just don't think this, even with a lot of customization, I don't think this would ever sit comfortably as one logo. So here, this is interesting. This, I believe, is one typeface. And this is kind of a way it comes out if you just type the brand name. They've got some ligatures included, but for me this doesn't quite run nicely. The L, particularly into the O, is quite a clumsy kind of joint there. The curve of the O is flowing in one direction. The L is kind of bending into it. The two don't interact. So, that to me doesn't work as it is. And the same with the R and the S. This feels quite clumsy. The angles aren't quite working. So sometimes you'll find fonts which out of a box kind of try to embrace this concept, but you've really got to, and again, we're going to look at this in a future lesson, pull this apart and kind of rework it and make it so the elements are flowing together seamlessly. And here's another example. So an out of a box font. And again, some fancy ligatures going on. And, I don't hate the idea of this. I think it's a little too busy. So maybe you could look at keeping some of these elements. Could work quite nicely. I quite like this ligature that comes off of the V. And it kind of encircles. That's quite cool. Encircles the whole logo type. And then it comes and swoops back around. Kind of comes back on itself. That's quite nice. So maybe you could use some of these elements, but I think just too much going on here. And if I, let's just revert back to a different glyph for our V. If we look just at this, just at the L, it's kind of a clumsy interaction with the A. It's kind of a nice idea, but there's this, if I zoom in, there's this kind of clumsy little gap where as it swoops back round, I'd want this to maybe be hitting the crossbar of the A. There's this little bit of a serif here popping out. So as we're going to look at later, these are good ideas, but the execution, it's got to be neater and tidier than this. It's got to really feel that it flows seamlessly. So overall, some nice ideas, I think, that are included in this out of a box font, but some customization, some tidying would be needed. So Looking Glass Studio, that's actually a brand I worked on. And I've just exaggerated some of the options here so that you can see what doesn't work. So this is quite interesting, kind of reducing the spacing and looking for opportunities to have these parts of these characters flow together. So you can see some of this, and I haven't outlined the font yet. Just a case of reducing the tracking, the letter spacing, the kerning. Kind of already you can see in some cases it's flowing together quite nicely. So when you outline the font and you tidy this up, not much work to do actually to get some of these letters to flow together. But in other cases, like these two S's, we've got an ugly gap here. So that's something, you wouldn't be able to present this as a final logo. You definitely want to do some tidying up. And then when you're exploring kind of options to tighten things up, to have letters flow one into the other, just something to be aware of is legibility. So if you were to kind of look at this and think, that's nice, I could flow the G into the L. The problem is you've now made it a bit unclear whether this is a G or not, because we're covering so much of it. So although you can tell it's still a G, through some of the details, we've kind of made it harder at first glance to be able to read that. And that's a pretty important rule we don't want to break. In customizing a logo, legibility is absolutely key. And then we'll look at just a few more examples. So kind of along the same lines. Can you tell that the first few letters are M-I-R? You kind of can, even though we've merged these together. I think the M is quite clear, the R is quite clear, but you still find yourself having to look just a little harder to make out that that's an I. So that's something to bear in mind. I love the way the R and A come together, the A and B. That's nice, no legibility issues there. Here, again, this is supposed to end in E-L-L-E. Those L's become quite unclear. You have to really take a look at them to work out which is which, because we've merged portions together. And if I exaggerate that a bit further, in this version, just showing you I's, L's, E's used together, this is an absolute headache to try to read, because we've merged those portions together and it's not clear which character is part of which. It's really difficult to read that. So that's a potential mistake, a bad example to look out for. So I hope these examples have been helpful, both for good and for bad. And some of the mistakes I've kind of warned you to look out for, we're going to dive into those in later lessons, and I'll show you some ways to work around some of these potential problems. So now that we have an idea of the kind of thing we're looking to create, we're going to have some fun in the next lesson with some experimenting.